I'll apologise first of all because I'm not from London. I have a slight accent, or at least rather, I don't, you do. But if at any point it's a problem, do shout. This is a different type of environment for me. Normally I'm dealing with big firms, boardrooms, suits. I actually was once turned away from a meeting at Barclays because I had the wrong colour suit on. I was wearing a tan suit and that wasn't suitable for the boardroom. So an environment like this, very intimate and open, is quite different. But I started my career and I started my working life rather than flip charts and post-it notes, which is mostly what I do now, but I started there, or rather not quite as glamorous as that. But I started at 18. I was the youngest and shortest licensed doorman in the city of Westminster. And my nose is still straight, you'll notice. But I did that through some really quite fun and interesting pubs in Kilburn and Neasden and Tottenham and all of those fun places. A little bit like that bar in Star Wars, you know, the sort of wretched hive of scum and villainy. But it taught me an awful lot. And there's a lot of the lessons from this apply to the work I do now, dealing with managers, staff members, people who are trying to do change into organisations and struggling. Really, my career has always been about having difficult conversations and telling people things that they perhaps don't want to hear, or helping them come to terms with that, whether it is the fact that I'm really sorry you're not coming in tonight in those shoes, or it is that you're going to be losing your job, and I know that's really tough, but we can maybe help you through it. So the strength to do that came to me from a couple of different things, and the way I learned. I grew up in an old pit village in the northeast of England, and I was, again, I had a single mum. I was brought up to be quite polite, and that doesn't really work well in pit villages. As Steve will probably attest, Belfast being very much the same. So I learned to handle myself quite early, but I also learned the joys of a good library. And being a poor primary school I was going to, we didn't have the most up-to-date library. What we did have was a lot of books by this guy, G.A. Henty. It's not something I'd necessarily recommend for children now. It's a little bit dated in its attitudes to race and empire and culture and gender and all those sorts of things. But what it does have is this long-running tradition of correct behaviour and of plucky heroes doing the right thing and coming out on top over baddies and untrustworthy types. And that was kind of what I grew up with. Much as I did, as I was later, reading books like Trust the Legend. Anyone here read Trust the Legend? It's just Zach and I probably. But this was a thing when I was sort of 13, 14 and being bullied at school and in quite a dark place. Trust the Legend was a hero, and he had this code they called the Iron Code of Dross, and it was super manly. Oh, it's great. Never violate a woman nor harm a child. Do not lie, cheat or steal. These things are for lesser men. Protect the weak against the evil strong, and never allow thoughts of gain to lead you into the pursuit of evil, which is quite melodramatic, which is ideal when you're a 14-year-old boy and you're reading high fantasy, but it actually had a little bit of an impact on me. That stood me in good stead, and I was also quite lucky. Again, that single family, didn't have a dad at the time, but I did have my granddad Tom. It's a little bit of a dark photo, but what my granddad Tom taught me, as well as the advantages of a killer sports coat, is to be polite and kind and generous. And my he passed when I was about 14, 15, and I was struck at the funeral of what I'd thought to be quite a kind but relatively quiet man. And all these people came up to me to tell me how he'd helped them, how he'd done things for them, how he'd been, I didn't realise this, he'd been chopping firewood for the neighbour next door for years, and no one really knew. He just did it without being asked or without making a song and dance about it. A truly gentle man in the best spirit of it. And that was the things I learned from him were I didn't realise until later really how quite important they were. And then later in life, when I was involved in doing security work and I was doing pubs and clubs and prisoner escorts and clamping and debt collecting and all sorts of really quite shady things and getting into quite a dark period in my life and losing my way a little bit, I ran into this guy, Alan Grouch, who is a fabulous character. He was the first Westerner to perform judo for the Emperor of Japan, and he's a real old school London bouncer. And the advice he gave to me was, you've got to be proper, or rather, you've got to be proper, James, you've got to be proper. Because as he said to me, that there'll come a time, and it doesn't matter if you're doing work like door work or if you're doing things where your skill and your look and your charm and all of those things run out. And all that's left is what you are and what you stand for and what you believe in. And that's been true for me in a few times, both in terms of business, when I've been trying to save a deal and trying to turn around maybe a big contract for a firm, or when I've been at the back of a pub and three guys have been wanting to explain to me about why they're really not impressed with my behaviour. But being proper, being right, and being correct is probably the only thing that stands between us and the base of being immoral or being wrong. You can call that chivalry. You can apply lots of different codes to it. The idea of the golden rule, the golden rule, do as you would be done by. Yeah, it's at the basis of all sort of philosophy. Pretty much everything after that is just a footnote to the golden rule. But being proper is important, and chivalry is one way to do that. As Omar said, man, got to have a code. I'm a bit of a geek in all sorts of ways, and HBO is probably one of my favourite things. And it's really interesting for me, coming from a business perspective, is that HBO have this idea of man, got to have a code. And it's always anti-heroes, so guys like Omar or Tony Soprano or guys like that. But it actually follows HBO's own path. They were struggling in the late 80s. They were doing terrible B movies and excuses to show softcore porn. And then they turned it around and they started showing quality TV. And they've effectively redefined an industry quietly, where there's probably more quality now in the TV miniseries than there is in Hollywood, I would argue. Certainly it's why I watch War Off. So, man, got to have a code. It'd be really easy to kind of turn this type of talk into Jeremiah. Jeremiah from the Bible wrote this big long speech about how terrible the world was and it's all gone to hell in a handbasket. And this could be that, but actually I don't believe it. Because through the stuff I do with The Perfect Gentleman, through the work I do, through coaching and mentoring I do with different organisations, I meet a lot of very fine, very good young men and women. And there's a lot of goodness out there that just needs to be tapped and helped and nurtured along. And it's really hard for men, I think, especially a lot of young men, in environments where they're exposed to things like the horrible men's rights movement. Can you guys come across that? It's not at all fun. Pick-up artists, porn, footballers, rappers, role models are really important. And like it or not, people tend to listen to role models of their own gender, at least at first. So it's very important, I feel, for men to have good male role models. It was very much for me growing up, through my grand Tom, through Alan, through Russ the Legend and his Iron Code. And I think that's one of the things that can be quite hard for young men now. Certainly, I do martial arts coaching with young guys, and the difference that you see in their behaviour after seeing and spending time with men who value moral behaviour is quite key. And it's quite interesting as well even for older men. I'm doing some work at the moment with Network Rail, and they've got a huge problem or a huge drive to try and reduce suicides on the railway. And suicide is primarily a white male disease. It affects all sorts of people, but the overwhelming majority of people who commit suicide are white, middle-aged, working-class men. Men who are probably lost and don't have that code, don't have that identity to stand behind, to say that I am something more. What's interesting is suicide for women, we've done a lot of work in that area as a society. Since 1981, it's dropped by about 46%. For men, it's gone up by about 15% in 30 years. About 4,500 men every year commit suicide, and that's not counting those who perhaps kill themselves in other ways that don't necessarily appear. So, terribly depressing, I know. But I think there's a real way out of that through having a code. Groups like these guys, Fathers Inc., which is a West Indian group based in Jamaica, but they do work in the US and in the UK, teaching fathers to be fathers and the importance of spending time with their sons and reading with them and things like that. There's a lot you can do through being strong, being moral, by being that role model. There is a poem, I'm not going to read it because it always makes me cry, but it's called the Little Fellow Who Follows. I was given that when I became a godfather a couple of years ago, and it's about the importance of how boys will see men and will follow and do what they do, and how As a man, it becomes easier to be strong when you're aware of that, because you know that you can't let the base show through. And I think all of us, it doesn't matter really how old we are. I see this when I'm coaching execs and guys in their 50s who've been in long careers. All of us are both the man who leads and the little fellow who follows. We all need that code to support us and to drive what we do. Man, got to have a code. That's basically what it comes down to. Sandro Clegane, probably one of the coolest anti-heroes on TV at the moment, especially because he detests being called a knight, yet is probably the most moral of the characters in Game of Thrones. For me, my morality comes from the lessons I learned from Henty, humanism, and I'm a Freemason, and Freemasonry, a peculiar code of morals. Very important to me, but everyone will find their own kind of core of moral. That can be something as complex as real, something based around a very complex chivalric code. It could be as simple as just cleaving to the golden rule. I would recommend that the ideas that the other guys who talked about manners, about respect, about how you show yourself to the world are important. And chivalry is a great way of doing that. Chivalry is more than just something I do for you, it's something I do for myself, because it bespeaks confidence, it bespeaks value of myself, that I care about how I'm perceived by the world, and I show my respect for myself by how I show respect for you. So chivalry, I think, is probably, it's unfortunately a little bit dark, but it was the ideal that saw us right the way through, sort of from the Dark Ages through to modern day. And I think with a bit of tweaks and a bit of allowance for changing social mores and for different rules, it'll see us on a bit further still. So thank you very much for your kind attention. I'll be about if you want to have a chat. Okay, thank you very much, guys.